Carnival night. Have you ever felt the ground slip out from under you right in the middle of a crowd? I have. It happened in New Orleans, at a masquerade ball in an old mansion in the French Quarter. I was standing there with a glass of bourbon, dressed as a jazz player, when I saw her, my wife Isabelle. Her silver mask glittered under the chandeliers, and her blood-red dress hugged her like she was the queen of the night. But she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes, those green sparks I'd adored for 10 years, were locked on him. A tall man in a black mask, holding her waist like she belonged to him. I'm Freddie Harrison, a 38-year-old architect from a quiet Atlanta suburb with a life I thought was solid. Couldn't believe it. We'd come here together to celebrate our anniversary. But there she was, my Isabelle, dancing with a stranger, laughing in a way she hadn't with me in years. Her hand slid up his shoulder. His fingers lingered on her back. It wasn't just a dance. It was a signal, and I felt something dark boiling in my chest. What would you do? Walk away? Grab another drink? Pretend you didn't see? Couldn't. I set my glass down and followed them through the crowd. The jazz blared, laughter echoed off the wooden walls, but all I heard was her voice. Low, intimate, whispering something to him by the stairs. They headed for the exit, and I trailed behind, hiding among masks and shadows. Outside, the humid New Orleans air hit me like a slap. I watched them climb into a black SUV. His hand on her knee, her not even glancing back. The car vanished into the dark streets, leaving me under a gas lamp with my heart pounding like a drum. Where were they going? And why hadn't she said a word to me? That night, I went back to our hotel on Bourbon Street. Isabelle stumbled in at 3 a.m., smelling of magnolia and lies. Where were you? I asked, trying to sound calm. Out with a friend, she mumbled, avoiding my eyes, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I knew it was a lie. And when she drifted off, I did something I'd never done before. I dug into her purse. There, crumpled among lipstick and keys, was a receipt. Riverside Hotel, room 312, one night. Dated today. But the name on it? Not mine. It was her brother's, Jake. My brother-in-law had paid for a room where my wife went with another man. What the hell was going on? I sat there in the dark, clutching that slip of paper, realizing this was just the start. Isabelle had betrayed me, but why was Jake covering for her? What were they hiding? And how far was I willing to go to find out? The next morning, I sat at breakfast pretending everything was fine. Isabelle sipped her coffee, scrolling her phone, while I stared at her, thinking, who are you really? That smile I used to brag about now felt like a mask, just like the one she wore at the ball. The receipt burned a hole in my pocket, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed answers, not a fight. I decided to start with Jake. He lived in a rundown house on the outskirts of Baton Rouge. We'd never been close. He was always distant, cold as a winter wind. But he was her brother, her only family since their parents passed. Maybe that's why I trusted him. Big mistake. When I knocked, he didn't open right away. Freddie, what are you doing here? His voice was sharp, his eyes dodging mine. I stepped inside, holding the receipt. Explain this, I said, tossing it on the table. He glanced at it and froze. It's a mix-up, he muttered. But I saw his fingers tremble. A mix-up? You paid for a hotel room where my wife went with another guy. I saw them, Jake, at the masquerade, in the car. Did you know? He stared at the floor, silent. Then, quietly, she asked me to help. Help? My blood boiled. Help hide her cheating, I shouted. He looked up, and there was something odd in his eyes, not shame but fear. You don't know everything, he whispered. That hit me like a bolt. Don't know everything? What did that mean? I grabbed his collar. Talk, or I'll find out myself. He shoved me back. Stay out of it, Freddie. For your own good. But I was done listening. I stormed out, jumped in my car, and headed to the Riverside Hotel. In the lobby, I flashed the receipt at the clerk. Who was in this room? I demanded. She eyed me warily but said, a woman and a man. He kept his mask on, even here. Mask on. In a hotel? Who was this guy? And why was Isabelle with him? I begged to see the cameras, but she refused, cops only. That night, back home, Isabelle slept while I sat up, thinking. Jake knew. He was covering for her. But why? Was this just an affair? Or something bigger? Then it hit me. A year ago, she'd gone to a friend's for 3 days. Came back pale, quiet. Jake had been weird then too. Was this not the first time? Had I been living a lie longer than I thought? I couldn't let it go. The next day, I was back at the Riverside Hotel, my mind racing. The clerk wouldn't budge, so I slipped a 50 to a housekeeper I caught on break. Room 312, I said. What did you find in there? She hesitated, then shrugged. Not much. Trash, a mask, and a torn note. A mask? My pulse spiked. What did the note say? She frowned, thinking. Something like, meet me in Chicago. Chicago? That was 800 miles away. What was Isabelle doing planning a trip with this creep? I pressed her for more, but that was it. I left the hotel with a fire in my gut. This wasn't just a fling. It was a secret life one Jake was tangled into. Back at the hotel room, I checked Isabelle's phone while she showered. Nothing obvious, no texts, no calls. She was smart. Too smart. But I found an airline app buried in a folder. A ticket to Chicago booked for tomorrow under her maiden name, Isabelle Carter. She hadn't even bothered to tell me she was leaving town. I felt sick, betrayed, but more than that, curious. What was in Chicago? That night, she packed a bag, humming like nothing was wrong. Work trip, she said, kissing my cheek. I nodded, playing along. But as soon as her cab pulled away, I booked a flight. I wasn't letting her slip through my fingers again. What would you do? Confront her now or follow the trail? I chose the trail. Something told me this masked man wasn't just a lover, and Jake's warning echoed in my head. You don't know everything. Damn right I didn't. But I was about to. I landed in Chicago with a carry-on bag and a heart full of rage. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through my jacket as I stepped out of O'Hare Airport, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was Isabelle, my wife of 10 years, sneaking off to meet some mystery man in a mask. That note from the hotel, meet me in Chicago, burned in my mind. What was she hiding? And why was her brother, Jake, so desperate to keep me in the dark? I tracked her flight. She landed 2 hours before me, giving her a head start. I didn't know where she'd gone, but I had a hunch. Isabelle loved diners, greasy spoons with strong coffee, and vinyl booths. If she was meeting this guy somewhere low-key, that's where she'd be. I rented a car and hit the streets, checking every dive I could find within a mile of downtown. It took 3 stops, but I found her. There, through the fogged-up window of a place called Marty's Diner on Clark Street, I saw her. Isabelle sat in a corner booth, her silver mask gone, but that red dress unmistakable. Across from her was him, the tall guy from the Masquerade, still wearing that damn black mask, even now. My stomach twisted. Who wears a mask in a diner? What kind of psycho was I dealing with? I slipped inside, keeping my head low, and grabbed a seat near the counter, close enough to hear but far enough to stay unseen. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fries, the jukebox playing some old Springsteen tune. Isabelle leaned in, her voice low but sharp. We need to move the money soon, she said. He's getting suspicious. The masked man nodded, his voice muffled but deep. Tomorrow, then. The plan's still on. Money? Plan? My head spun. This wasn't just an affair, it was a scheme. But what kind? And who was he? Me? Freddie Harrison, the clueless husband she'd left sipping bourbon in New Orleans? I gripped the edge of the counter, fighting the urge to storm over and rip that mask off his face. But I needed more. I needed proof. Then my phone buzzed. Jake. I stepped outside to take it, the cold biting my ears. Freddie, where are you? He hissed. Get back to Atlanta. Now. His voice trembled, not with anger, but panic. You followed her, didn't you? I snapped back, damn right I did. She's in Chicago with him, talking about money and plans. What the hell's going on, Jake? He went quiet, then whispered, you're in over your head. Stop digging. Stop digging. I laughed, bitter and loud. My wife's running around with a masked freak, and you're covering for her. I'm not stopping till I know everything. I hung up before he could reply, my breath fogging in the air. Jake's fear only fueled me. He knew something big, something he couldn't or wouldn't tell me. Back inside, I saw them stand. The masked man dropped a wad of cash on the table, way too much for coffee, and they headed for the door. I ducked behind a menu as they passed. Up close, he was taller than I'd thought, broad-shouldered, moving like he owned the place. Isabelle kept her head down, but I caught her eyes, nervous, darting. She wasn't the confident queen from the ball anymore. She was scared. They climbed into that same black SUV from New Orleans. I tailed them in my rental, keeping a few cars back as they wove through Chicago's night traffic. My hands shook on the wheel. What if they saw me? What if this guy was dangerous? But I couldn't turn back. Not now. They pulled into a parking garage near the loop. I parked a level below and followed on foot, sticking to the shadows. Up on the third floor, I watched them step out. The masked man pulled something from the trunk. A black duffel bag, heavy by the way he carried it. Isabelle glanced around, then said, "If Freddie finds out, it's over." He smirked, and replied, "He won't. Not yet." My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. Whatever this was, money, a plan, a bag in a garage, it involved screwing me over. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. Was this betrayal financial, emotional, or both? And how deep did Jake's role go? What would you do? Confront them in that garage? Risk it all? Or wait? Gather more? I chose to wait. But as their taillights faded, one thing was clear. Isabelle wasn't just cheating. She was playing a game I didn't understand, and I was the pawn. I couldn't stay in Chicago after what I'd seen. Isabelle and that masked man with their duffel bag, their talk of money and plans, it was too much. I needed answers, and Jake was the key. I caught a red-eye flight back to Baton Rouge, my mind a tornado of betrayal and questions. By the time I landed, the sun was barely up, painting the sky a bruised purple. I didn't care. I drove straight to Jake's rundown house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. He opened the door in a bathrobe, bleary-eyed, like he hadn't slept either. "Freddie?" he croaked, stepping back as I barged in. The place stank of stale beer and regret. I didn't waste time. "I saw her," I said, my voice shaking. "In Chicago. With him. Talking about money, a plan. She said if I find out, it's over." "What the hell is she doing, Jake? And why are you in on it?" He sank onto a ratty couch, running a hand through his thinning hair. For a moment, he just stared at the floor, like he could wish me away. Then he muttered, "I told you to stop digging. That set me off." I slammed my fist on the coffee table, knocking over an empty bottle. "Stop digging? My wife's sneaking around with some masked creep, and you're paying for hotel rooms. Tell me the truth, or I swear I'll—" "Okay," he shouted, cutting me off. His eyes met mine, wild and desperate. "Okay, I'll tell you, but you're not gonna like it." He took a shaky breath, then started. "It's not what you think. He's not her lover. He's a partner. They're working together." I blinked, my anger stalling. "Partner? For what?" Jake swallowed hard. "Money. Big money. She's been moving cash, offshore stuff, shady accounts. I don't know all the details. She wouldn't tell me." My head spun. Isabelle, my Isabelle, involved in something illegal? "Why?" I demanded. "Why would she do this?" He looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because of me." That stopped me cold. "What?" Jake rubbed his face, guilt etched in every line. 5 years ago, I got in deep with some bad people. Gambling debts, loans I couldn't pay. Isabelle bailed me out. But she didn't have the cash then. She borrowed it. From the wrong kind of guy. And he's been holding it over her ever since. I stumbled back, leaning against the wall. "Blackmail?" Jake nodded. "She's been paying him off little by little. But it's not enough anymore. He wants more, bigger jobs, riskier moves. That guy in the mask? He's part of it. She's in too deep to get out." My chest tightened. "And you let her?" I roared. "You let your sister ruin her life? Our life? To clean up your mess?" He flinched. "I didn't have a choice. She begged me to keep quiet. Said she'd handle it. The hotel receipt. That was me trying to help, to keep it off her card so you wouldn't see." Help? It was laughable, but I wasn't laughing. "She's my wife, Jake. Why didn't she tell me?" His eyes darkened. "Because she didn't want you involved. She said you'd try to fix it and it'd destroy you. She's protecting you in her messed up way." "Protecting me?" The words felt like a punch. All this time, I'd thought she was cheating, breaking my heart for fun. But this was worse. She was a criminal. tangled in a web of lies and debt, all to save her deadbeat brother. And I'd been blind to it. How long? I asked, my voice hoarse. How long has this been going on? He hesitated. Years. Before you even married her. Years. Before our vows, our house, our life. My knees buckled, and I sat hard on the floor. The woman I loved had been a stranger from the start. What's in Chicago? I pressed. Jake shook his head. I don't know. Something big. She wouldn't say. But Freddie, if you keep chasing this, you'll lose everything. She's scared. Not just of him, but of you finding out who she really is. I stared at him, the brother-in-law I'd never trusted. Now spilling a truth I couldn't unhear. Isabelle wasn't just betraying me with another man. She was betraying me with a whole damn life I didn't know about. And that masked man? He wasn't the fling I'd imagined. He was her accomplice. What would you do? Forgive her for the lies? Try to save her? Or walk away from the wreckage? I didn't know yet. But one thing was clear. I had to face her. Whatever she was planning in Chicago, I'd be there to see it through, for better or worse. After Jake's confession, I couldn't sit still. My wife, my Isabelle, wasn't just cheating. She was neck-deep in a criminal mess, all to cover for her brother's screw-ups. Years of lies, shady money, and that masked man pulling strings in the shadows. I had to end it. I booked the next flight back to Chicago, my mind a war zone of anger and heartbreak. Whatever she was planning there, I'd be the one to stop it or crash and burn trying. I landed at dusk, the city lights flickering like a bad omen. I didn't know exactly where Isabelle was, but I remembered that parking garage near the loop from last time. It was a gut call, but it paid off. As I pulled in, I spotted that black SUV parked on the 4th level, its engine still warm. My heart pounded. She was here. So was he. I crept closer, sticking to the concrete pillars, and saw them, Isabelle and the masked man, standing by the open trunk. That same duffel bag sat between them, unzipped, stuffed with cash. Isabelle's voice cut through the silence, tense and sharp. This is the last drop. After this, I'm out. The masked man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You don't get to walk away, Isabelle. Not until I say so. She flinched, and I saw her hand tremble as she clutched her phone. That was it. I couldn't wait anymore. I stepped out, my shadow stretching across the floor. It's over, I said, loud enough to echo. They spun around, Isabelle's face going white as a ghost. Freddie, she gasped. The masked man reached for something in his jacket, probably a gun, but I didn't care. I marched forward, eyes locked on her. I know everything. Jake told me. The debts, the blackmail, the money. All of it. She stared at me, her green eyes wide with panic. You weren't supposed to, she started, but I cut her off. Supposed to what? Stay clueless while you ruin us? Who is this guy? I jabbed a finger at the masked man, who stood silent, his hand still hovering near his jacket. Isabelle swallowed hard. Freddie, please. Just go. You don't understand, Then make me. I shouted. Tell me why you've been lying to me for years. Tell me why I'm finding out my wife's a criminal from her brother instead of her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't back down. Because I had no choice, she snapped. Jake was drowning and I couldn't let him die. You wouldn't get it, you've never had to scrape by, to claw your way out of nothing. That stung. I'd worked hard for our life, but she was right, I hadn't known her world before me. Still, it didn't excuse this. So you teamed up with him? I nodded at the masked man. Who is he, Isabelle? Take off the damn mask and face me. To my surprise, he smirked and pulled it off himself. Underneath was a scarred face, hard eyes, someone I didn't know, but Isabelle clearly did. His name's Victor, she said quietly. He's the one I borrowed from. The one who owns me. Victor chuckled. She's a good worker, Harrison. Too bad you're here to mess it up. He pulled a pistol from his jacket, leveling it at me. Isabelle screamed no and lunged at him, but he shoved her back. I dove behind a car as he fired, the shot ringing in my ears. Concrete dust stung my face. This was real now, too real. I scrambled up, adrenaline pumping, and tackled him before he could aim again. We hit the ground hard, the gun skittering across the floor. Isabelle yelled, Freddie, stop, but I didn't listen. I pinned Victor, slamming his head against the pavement. You don't own her. I growled. He laughed through bloodied teeth. She's been mine longer than you've known her. That froze me. I looked at Isabelle, crumpled by the SUV, tears streaming down her face. What's he talking about? I demanded. She sobbed, her voice breaking. We were together. Before you. I left him, but he never let go. When Jake needed help, Victor was there. It started again, not love, just debt. I didn't want you to know who I really was. The air left my lungs. She'd been with this monster before me? And now he dragged her back into his world? Victor groaned beneath me, but I barely noticed. Isabelle's words cut deeper than any bullet. My wife wasn't just a liar, she was a stranger with a past I couldn't unsee. What would you do? Fight for her anyway? Or let her go? I didn't have an answer, not yet. But the truth was out, and it was uglier than I'd ever imagined. The parking garage was silent except for Isabelle's sobs and Victor's ragged breathing beneath me. I had him pinned, his blood smeared on the concrete, but my eyes were on her, my wife, unraveling before me. She just dropped a bomb. She'd been with this scarred thug, Victor, before me. Not just a fling, but a life she'd buried until Jake's debts dragged her back into it. My hands shook as I let Victor go, standing up slow like the weight of her words was crushing me. Victor coughed, smirking despite the busted lip. You're too late, Harrison. She's mine, always has been. I kicked him in the ribs hard, shutting him up. Isabelle flinched, whispering, Freddie, don't. But I wasn't hearing her. Not anymore. I grabbed the duffel bag of cash and hurled it at her feet. This what you've been fighting for? Dirty money to keep this creep happy. She looked at the bag, then at me, tears streaking her face. No. It was for us, for Jake, for a way out. I thought I could fix it, get free. Her voice cracked. I didn't want you to see this side of me. I laughed, harsh and bitter. What side? The liar? The criminal? Or the woman who loved a guy like him? I pointed at Victor, who was dragging himself up, clutching his side. Isabelle stepped closer, her hands trembling. I didn't love him. I was young, desperate, stuck in a hole I couldn't climb out of. When I met you, I thought I'd escaped. But Victor found me after Jake's mess. He owned me again. I hated it, Freddie. Every second. Her eyes begged me to believe her, but my trust was ash. I paced, the gun still lying a few feet away, glinting under the fluorescent lights. Victor eyed it, but I stepped between him and it. So all those years, our marriage, our life, it was a lie? I asked. She shook her head. Not all of it. I loved you. I still do. That's why I kept you out of this. Kept me out? It was almost funny. I'd spent days chasing her from New Orleans to Chicago, piecing together her secrets, nearly getting shot for it, and she thought she was protecting me. You should have told me, I said, my voice low. I'd have fought for you. But you chose him. You chose this. I kicked the bag again, bills spilling out. Victor laughed, a wet, ugly sound. She didn't choose me, pal. She chose survival. You're too soft to get it. I spun on him, ready to finish what I'd started, but Isabelle grabbed my arm. Let him go, Freddie. Please. It ends tonight, I swear. Her grip was tight, her eyes pleading. I looked at her, really looked. The woman I'd married was there, buried under layers of fear and regret, but so was someone else. Someone I'd never known. Victor staggered to his feet, smirking. See you around, Isabelle. I lunged, but she held me back. No. He's nothing without the money. Let him crawl away. And he did. Victor limped off into the shadows, leaving the cash behind. I stood there, breathing hard, watching him disappear. Isabelle sank to her knees beside the bag, sobbing. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll turn myself in. Tell the cops everything. Just don't hate me. Hate her? I didn't know what I felt. Rage, sure. Pain, absolutely. But love? It was still there, tangled up in the wreckage. I crouched beside her, my voice quiet. I don't hate you. But I can't live like this, not knowing who you are. She nodded, tears dripping onto the concrete. I'll go. You deserve better. Did I? I wasn't sure. I could call the cops, let her face the consequences. Or I could take her home, try to rebuild something from the ashes. But as I looked at her broken, beautiful, a stranger in my wife's skin, I made my choice. I stood up, leaving the bag where it was. Goodbye, Isabelle, I said, and walked away. Her cries echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I drove out of Chicago that night, the city lights fading in my rear view. The life I'd known was gone, torched by her secrets. Maybe she'd turn herself in. Maybe Victor would come for her again. It wasn't my fight anymore. I'd loved her, still did, in some twisted way, but love wasn't enough to fix this. So here's the question, folks, what would you do? Forgive the lies, fight to save her? Or walk away from a love built on quicksand? I chose my path. What's yours? Thank you very much for listening to this story to the end. I hope you liked. We work for you, looking for and telling you the most effective stories about women's betrayal, shocking intrigue, interweaving the plot, and unexpected reactions of angry men. Save us, put likes, write comments, and, of course, subscribe to the channel to not miss any story.